My name is Jasmine, and I'm 26 years old. Today, I want to share how my life changed after I got married. Before marriage, I had dreams of finding true love and building a life full of happiness with my soulmate. For a time, I thought I had found it. It all started 3 years ago when I met Daniel. He seemed perfect, charming, confident, and with a smile that could light up any room. We met at a friend's wedding. I still remember the way he looked at me from across the room, as if the world had faded away, and I was the only one there. With quiet confidence, he walked up to me, his voice soft yet sure. "Hi," he said, his eyes locked on mine. "I'm Daniel, and I couldn't leave tonight without introducing myself to the most beautiful woman here." I laughed nervously, unsure of how to respond, but his warm demeanor put me at ease. We talked for hours that evening, sharing stories, laughing, and connecting in a way I had never felt before. By the end of the night, we were dancing under the fairy lights, and I knew something special had begun. From that day, Daniel and I were inseparable. We spent our days exploring the city, having long conversations, and creating memories. He had a way of making me feel special, leaving handwritten notes, surprising me with flowers, or simply showing up when I needed him most. About a year into our relationship, Daniel planned a surprise evening at the beach. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. As we walked along the shoreline, barefoot and hand in hand, he stopped suddenly and turned to face me. He knelt down on one knee and pulled out a small velvet box. "Jasmine," he began, his voice trembling, "you're my everything. I can't imagine a single day without you. Will you marry me?" Tears filled my eyes as I whispered, "Yes." He slipped the ring onto my finger, and we kissed as the waves gently crashed against the shore. It felt like a scene straight out of a dream. Our wedding was just as magical. Surrounded by family and friends, we exchanged vows in a beautiful garden adorned with flowers and twinkling lights. Daniel looked at me like I was the only person in the world, and as we danced to our favorite song, he whispered, "I'll love you forever." For the first few weeks after the wedding, life was perfect. We moved into a cozy house, spent evenings cooking together, and dreamed of our future. Daniel would kiss me every morning before work and tell me he loved me. I felt like I was living a fairy tale. But then, things began to change. It started subtly. Daniel began coming home from work looking exhausted and distracted. He grew quieter, and his once loving gestures became rare. At first, I thought it was just work stress, but his mood shifted in ways I couldn't ignore. He started snapping over small things. One evening, I accidentally dropped a glass, and his reaction shocked me. "Can't you be more careful?" he shouted, his face red with frustration. "I'm sorry," I stammered, but he stormed out of the house, leaving me alone and shaken. Over time, Daniel's behavior became more unpredictable. One night, I woke up to find him gone. Panic coursed through me as I searched the house, finally finding him standing on the roof, his gaze fixed on the sky. "Daniel," I called out, my voice quivering. "What are you doing up here?" He turned slowly, his eyes wild with a mix of fear and confusion. "Do you hear them, Jasmine?" The voices, they won't stop. I froze. Voices? What was he talking about? That's when I realized something far deeper was going on. Daniel wasn't just stressed, he was battling something far darker, something he hadn't shared with me. Daniel, I said, my voice soft as I took a hesitant step toward him. Come inside. It's cold out here. Let's talk, okay? Whatever it is, I'm here for you. He stood still for a long moment before nodding slowly and following me inside. I made him a cup of tea, and we sat together on the couch. He stared at the cup in his hands like it held the solution to everything. Daniel, I said gently, my voice barely a whisper. Are you okay? You can tell me anything. For a brief moment, I thought he might open up, but then he shook his head and gave me a hollow smile. I'm fine, Jasmine. Just had a rough day. But over the next few weeks, his behavior grew more erratic. He would wake up in the middle of the night, walking around the house, muttering to himself. I'd sometimes find him sitting in the dark, staring at nothing. And when I tried to speak to him, he either ignored me or lashed out. Once, when I asked him why he seemed so stressed, he shouted, "Why can't you just leave me alone?" and slammed the door. But it wasn't just the anger that scared me, it was the fear in his eyes. He looked like he was being haunted by something invisible. Then one night, it all came crashing down. I was in the kitchen, preparing dinner, when I heard a loud crash from the living room. I ran in and found Daniel standing over a shattered mirror, his fists bleeding. Daniel, what happened? I cried, rushing to him. His eyes met mine, filled with tears. They won't stop, Jasmine, he whispered, his voice breaking. The voices, they keep telling me things. I can't take it anymore. My heart shattered as I realized the truth. Daniel wasn't just overwhelmed, he was fighting an invisible battle, one that he had kept hidden from everyone, even me. That night, after Daniel fell asleep, I lay awake, my thoughts a whirlwind. I thought about all the signs I'd missed, all the moments when he tried to conceal his pain. I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. I needed to help him, but I didn't know how. The next morning, I called his brother, Liam. He was the only family member Daniel was close to, and I hoped he could shed some light on what was happening. Liam, I said, my voice shaky. Something's wrong with Daniel. He's been acting so strange, angry, distant, and he says he hears voices. There was a long pause before Liam spoke, his voice soft but serious. Jasmine, he said gently. There's something you need to know. Liam explained that Daniel had been diagnosed with severe schizophrenia in his early 20s. He had been through therapy and had been on medication for years, but just a few months before our wedding, he stopped taking his meds, convinced that he didn't need them anymore. He didn't want to tell you, Liam continued. He was afraid you wouldn't marry him if you knew. He wanted to protect you from all of this. I was in shock. How could he hide something so important from me? But as the shock began to settle, I realized that none of it mattered. I loved Daniel, and I wasn't going to walk away from him now. That evening, I sat Daniel down and told him what Liam had shared. At first, he denied it, insisting that he was fine, that he didn't need help. But when I told him I had seen the pain in his eyes, when I told him I understood the depth of his struggle, he broke down in front of me. "I didn't want you to see me like this," he said, his voice cracking. "I thought I could handle it. I thought I could be normal for you." I held him as he cried, my heart breaking for the man I loved, knowing that I had to help him through this, no matter what. "Daniel," I whispered softly, my voice shaky, "you don't have to go through this alone. I'm here for you. But we need to get you the help you deserve." It wasn't easy convincing him. He feared being judged, being seen as crazy. After weeks of gently urging him, he finally agreed to see a doctor. The diagnosis was exactly what I had feared. Daniel's schizophrenia had resurfaced. He needed to resume his medication and therapy. The journey was anything but smooth. There were days when Daniel refused to take his medication, claiming it made him feel detached from reality. On other days, his frustration would overflow, and he'd lash out in anger. Yet, I stayed by his side, even when it felt like my own strength was fading. In between the difficult moments, there were glimmers of hope. We spent a quiet afternoon at the park, and Daniel surprised me with a drawing of the two of us. There were evenings where we would talk and laugh, finding comfort in each other, even with the storm of his illness raging around us. One evening, as the sky darkened with the setting sun, Daniel turned to me, his voice full of emotion. "Thank you for not giving up on me, Jasmine." Tears welled up in my eyes as I hugged him tightly. "I promised, Daniel. I'll be with you through thick and thin." But as time went on, things only got harder. Despite his therapy and medication, Daniel's condition worsened. His mood swings grew more erratic, and the man I once knew seemed to slip further away under the weight of his illness. Our arguments became more frequent and more intense. One night, during a trivial disagreement, Daniel slammed his fist on the table and shouted, "Why do you always make me feel like I'm not enough?" I froze, my heart breaking. "Daniel, I'm trying my best to help you. Why can't you see that?" He stormed out, leaving me to stew in my thoughts. That night, the weight of everything hit me like a wave. I wasn't sure how much more I could handle. I called my parents, needing someone to listen. My mom patiently heard me out, then spoke softly, "Jasmine, love shouldn't hurt like this. You've given everything you can, but you also need to take care of yourself." Her words hit harder than I expected. I had been so focused on Daniel's pain that I had neglected my own. I was worn thin, emotionally drained, constantly on edge, waiting for the next eruption. Sitting alone in our bedroom, staring at our wedding photo, I asked myself if this was the life I truly wanted. For the first time, I allowed myself to answer honestly. The next day, I sat Daniel down, my heart heavy with what I had to say. "Daniel," I started, "I love you, and I always will. But I can't keep living like this. I've lost myself, and I can't keep sacrificing my own happiness to hold on to something that's breaking us both." his eyes filled with anger and confusion. "So, you're just giving up on me?" he asked. "No," I said quietly, my voice steady. "I'm not giving up on you. But I can't fix you, Daniel. You have to want to save yourself." It was the hardest thing I had ever said, but it was the right thing to do. The weeks that followed were filled with heartache, legal battles, and painful goodbyes. Daniel begged me to stay, promising things would change, but I had heard those promises before. "I'm not leaving because I don't love you," I told him during one of our final conversations. "I'm leaving because I love myself enough to know I deserve better." After the divorce, I moved back in with my parents. At first, I felt like I had failed. I had failed as a wife, as a partner. But over time, I began to heal. Therapy helped me process the trauma, and slowly, I started to rediscover who I was. I picked up running again, a passion I had set aside during my marriage. I started exploring new trails, breathing in fresh air, and challenging my limits. Slowly, I reconnected with my inner strength and determination. 3 years later, I was no longer the person I once was. I had grown stronger, wiser, and found a sense of accomplishment within myself. One afternoon, while sitting in a cafe, a man with kind eyes approached me. "Hi," he said with a warm smile. "Would you mind if I joined you?" I hesitated for a moment, then smiled back. "Sure." We spent hours talking, and for the first time in a long while, I felt something I thought I had lost: hope. Looking back, my marriage to Daniel was the most difficult chapter of my life. But it taught me something invaluable. Love isn't about perfection. It's about standing by someone through their struggles. But it's also about knowing when it's time to let go. I don't blame Daniel for what happened. He fought battles that I couldn't understand, and I truly hope he finds peace. But I've learned that sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is to let someone go. Life doesn't always go as planned, but often, it leads us to exactly where we need to be. For me, that meant walking away from a relationship that was breaking me and finding the courage to start anew. And now, as I move forward, I carry with me the most important lesson: true love begins with loving yourself.